Hi. Those of us who are lucky enough to know Ian Parks and be part of his Read to Write poetry group know that we've a lot to thank him for. So this video tribute, a reading of his poems, is our way, in a small way, of thanking him for everything he's done for us. So, be prepared for a journey through politics and love. Thank you, Ian.
Poet by Ian Parks. Instead of television, there was rain. My mother sat me down at the back door to watch the puddles forming in the yard. Next morning, in the playground, where they talked about Blue Peter and the football scores, I said, the rain came down like silken threads pooling at my feet. The raindrops pocked the slabs of Yorkshire stone. The sound of it reminded me of shallow waterfalls, a mermaid's smile. You ought to write that down, they said. I did. Instead of television, there was rain.
Strikebreakers. Look at them now. Who'd think that once they braved the picket line, sitting at the far end of the bar, ignored by those who went on strike. They spend all afternoon over one pint, or stare down at the carpet's threadbare swirls. In this pit village, memory is long as shadows that extend the full length of the valley, from the miner's welfare to the cenotaph. The room is crowded with the young, the brash call centre workers and their girls. Whatever else they might have done, rescued a neighbour from a flooded seam or pulled a man from safety when the props gave way, is forgotten and means nothing. Counts for less. They went back before they were allowed. While others scraped the slag heap for a bucket full of coal, or held a line at Orgreave when the mounted men broke through, they thought of their families, drifted back, were ferried under escort to the pithead by police. They weren't there when the brass bands played, the banners were unfurled, when the men marched to the pithead gate as if we'd won the day. They weren't there when the promises were made, remembered for one thing, they passed the time. They want to be forgiven, but we can't forgive. The seam runs deep, and deeper than you'd think. These are the cards that are dealt to us, and this is the life we live.
Songs of Freedom. And yes, I will be waiting where the road dips suddenly, but not this side of winter, and not where you're expecting me to be. Come north this time, and find me when it's done, my forehead pressed against the flashing dome, my hair cropped short just as it used to be. And tell me how the landscape looks from your side of the bay. Does it retain its dark complexity where moored boats tilt and nothing stays the same? These freedom songs are molten to the core. They rise from empty workings, gantries, wharves, unguarded moments where a thought might grow. So when they sing them, what I hear are voices of lost workers as they echo underground. And when I hear them, what I see are miles of rail track, cuttings, seams, vast waterways and networks heaving up to reach the light. This place might claim me yet. Its cold, its sharp austerities, its sense of having nothing left to prove, which finds me in the back streets of a hard backwater town, feeding the darkness with the dispossessed, the words of our dead language stuck and spinning in the groove.
Kaisarion. My intention was to check the facts, to pass a quiet hour or two among the names and faces of the past. The volume that I chose contained a history of the Ptolemies. The praise becomes monotonous. The men are just, magnificent and bold. The women, upright, beautiful. Just as I was about to close the book and place it on the shelf, I came across the briefest mention of Kaisarion, little Caesar, Caesar's son. I was drawn to it inexplicably. You stood there full of poise and charm, because the record is so sparse. I filled the sketch out in my mind, made you sensitive and shy, a dreaming, far-off face, despite the name they gave you, King of Kings. So vivid did I conjure you, that as the lamplight dimmed, you came into my darkened room, came close and stood in front of me, wearing the expression that you wore in fallen Alexandria, imploring them to pity you. Octavian's henchmen, those murderers who said, one Caesar is enough.
This is one Ian did for the Andrew Farmer portrait, poet and the painting at Doncaster Museum. Across the water. She hides among the bulrushes that fringe the shallow pond. She holds a drop of water in the hollow of her hand. Sometimes I find her footprints in the bedroom when I wake. Sometimes I hear her murmur when I blow the candle out. She will be there to take me when I breathe my final breath, to hold me like the child I was in her brown gypsy arms. She watches me intently from a bed among the reeds. She comes in silence, wishes me no harm. She moves among the horses in the fields beyond the bridge. I glimpse her in the dawn. Across the water where the mating swans will come in spring to build their fragile nests, her green eyes notice everything. She parts the stems and strokes the velvet heads. This cottage can't contain her with its random words. A smear of oil paint on the tabletop. She comes to me on the 6th day with a pearl between her breasts.
From Shell Island, a collection of poems by Ian Parks. Comrade. He came to a place of clear water, some distance from the harbour and its noise. The chapel door was open. He shrugged and stepped inside. She draped her promise like a purple robe across the altar where he paused to take in what was offered by the pale sunlight as it came against the glass. The incense made him hesitate. His journey was a long one. As he slipped from port to port, the ache that he called memory began to play him false, hauling past and future into one uncertain tense of heat and water, dangerous afternoons, high passes through the mountains that gathered to the lost word, Spain. He was a traveller after all, accustomed to the strangeness of an unfamiliar bed, worn sheets and love poems improvised from nothing but a snatch of gypsy song. A salt taste, recollected in old age and under the cold stars. What circumstances made him disregard the cities with their twisted minarets, their cautious guards with armbands and the market squares where everything, the bangles, carpets, women, had a price, but still had to be bargained for, relinquishing the pull of perfume and sleek bodies for a life among the altitudes where air came thin and precious, and the peasants scraped a living from the soil. Nothing was forgotten. Red flags against the ragged dawn, torn posters flapping free. The headlines, broadcast, barricades, dead comrades, fallen under olive trees. All was subsumed in the shifting core he called himself. Blurred nights hung over mornings, when the sun stood white and fragile as the moon, a hot flamenco raging through his head. Home had been in exile after this, the sameness of the mining towns, the greyness of the landscape, and the flatness of the beer. Those bars, cantinas, dark saloons had taken from him, but they also gave. He knew all there was to know of victory and loss, having tasted both and found them much the same. And now this God had failed him too. They nailed his message to an empty cross, or kept it locked in jewelled reliquaries under the altar, out of sight. What hidden impulse made him turn into a mountain track, decide it was as good a place as any to set down and make an end, where the air was scarce as water, and bats, erratic in the moonlight, veer and flit? We carried out his final wish, brought back the body, buried him at sea, threw garlands as it drifted to the bed. Someone discovered his forgotten poems and read them as we turned to face the shore. They spoke to us from under the cold waves of love and its stark opposite.
Beech Hut by Ian Parks. It's 30 years since I undid the lock to spend a rented summer under glass, a space no bigger than my bedroom now, the skylight slanting, sunlight through the planks. Blue meant a day for swimming in the sea, grey for reading till the weather cleared. One room where everything I needed was to hand, bare floorboards, faded rug, sand in my hair and in my jeans. It was a year of rioting, of running battles through the city streets, of looted shop fronts, shattered glass, cars overturned and burning in the road. The room over it didn't reach me there. I spread my sheets, slept on the floor, hung a rusted oil lamp from the beam, convinced the answer could be found in solitude and in the distant sound of waves as they came rippling to the shore. The place was a ramshackle wreck, held up by a lick of yellow paint. At night a big ship loomed against the sky, and from its bright and polished deck someone, I imagined, lit a foreign cigarette and smoked it slowly, leaning on the rail. Just once I saw a torchlight flashing back, but mostly it was dunes, resilient grass, the dog-eared books I read then threw away, the narratives I didn't want to share. The days grew shorter, cold set in, the beech huts emptied, I grew bored. Rain drove in every morning from the sea. I packed my rucksack, caught a train, sped inland through a landscape changed, to find the world not waiting anymore, back to the city with its new facade and the headlines I'd ignored.
Lavernock. There's a moment of pure stillness between one wave and the next, where the silence in the heart is amplified. It must have been an interval like this, a pause in the heaving of the stacked and waiting tide, when the first words were transmitted from a station near this point, then sent out to the island, skimming waves across the sound. I loved it, but had to leave behind the chapel with its green sea-tarnished bell and take the path that leads you down between sparse dune grass and a broken fence, then brings you out under the horizon's curving rim to meet someone's double where the cliffs disintegrate. What did he give me as I halted there to rifle through the shingle for a blue-veined souvenir? What can a stranger give you? On a stretch of empty shore, when you've been rendered silent by the fullness of it all, unless he says, before you have the chance, the self-same things you might have said about the exact colour of the sand, if the words you'd been given had fallen right. Or how the tide had gathered up its weight to make one final push against the land, which lies subdued and waiting for the surge it can't resist. then turns like a soldier on his heel to scale the rampart for a final look, and time begins again. I feared the chapel and its rusted cross had sunk into the headland and were gone, that the others who'd come with me, who'd stood waiting on the brink, had driven from the cliff top, also gone. I scrambled up into the fading light. The distant ridge came clear. What he gave me was permission to go on.
The Chelsea Hotel. I threw my papers in the air and left them where they fell. No time for writing poems, my dear, in the Chelsea Hotel. Dylan Thomas on his typewriter. He's doing very well. 100 floors above me in the Chelsea Hotel. Al Johnson with his black face. He hears the music well as he gazes from the window of the Chelsea Hotel. Something's peering around the corner. It has a curious smell. It's a gobbling in frustration. At the Chelsea Hotel. Jerry Lee Lewis at the piano. He knows he's going to hell. Singing Great Balls of Fire at the Chelsea Hotel. Paul Dyson. He's gone missing. He has a tale to tell. You'll find him in the lounge bar at the Chelsea Hotel. Bob Dylan is in the basement. His hair's slicked back with gel. He's writing Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands in the Chelsea Hotel. So make your reservation. Come in and ring the bell. There's a room for everybody at the Chelsea Hotel.
Grey Opal. Looking at this opal makes me think of those grey eyes that I once loved. Eyes I looked into deeply for a month before he took a job and moved away. Where did he go? I forget. It must be all 20 years, and yet it seems like yesterday. Eyes of opal. Opal eyes. Those eyes have lost their lustre, and that lovely face has aged. But memory, if you can bring them back, bring back a memory of that love. Make it come alive again, tonight.
The Land of Green Ginger by Ian Parks. Here is the smallest window in the world. Look through it, squinting with one eye. You'll see the things you're not supposed to see. The politician cheating on his wife, the fat priest stealing from the poor, the poet scribbling someone else's lines. Only in this quarter, in this district of the town, and only through this green and stamp-sized frame that didn't shatter in the Blitz, can you expect to see things as they really are. Other windows hide from us, distract us and distort, but this is the land of green ginger, a place where the sky and the estuary meet, where all the thin alleys deceive, double back and lead to a spot where strangeness occurs. Put your eye to the window, see how England goes, its coalition and its wars. The steady consolation of the rain, the failure to respond or change its constitution or its laws. Once I drank bitter from a cloudy glass among the city's dissident and peered out later on the green-tinged street where the world of commerce came and went, the ebb and flow refracted and contained inside the confines of a thick glass pane. The barmaid blinked, a tear from her eye. Then, after drinking, I went out into the bright, unequivocal day, arrived too early or too late, for this is the land of green ginger, and this is the window that never lies, where looking just once means looking again, What you think you know of this city of lost chances, where the rail lines terminate.
The wheel. The pithead used to dominate the town. My dead forefathers came and went, were buried in the shadow cast by it. I passed it on my way to school, heard its revolutions in the night. If the pithead was the place's heart, the great wheel was its soul. And then there was the slow dismantling. The slag heap was grassed over. It became an innocent green mound where cattle graze. They hauled the winding gear away and sold the chain for scrap, then took the giant wheel and clamped it down, reminding us of where we came from, what we did, and who we were. A monument of rusting metal spokes that radiate from hub to rim for kids to climb on, point at, questioning. Someday we'll come with picks and dynamite, dislodge it from its concrete plinth. We'll drag it from the valley floor, aim it at the cities of the south, set the wheel in motion, watch it roll.
The Ides of March. Be careful, soul. Be on your guard against ambition, fame and glory. Or if you must pursue them, do so cautiously. Be hesitant before you act. And if your actions take you to the heights, you'll need to be more searching than before. When you become like Caesar, when you reach that point at which you are unassailable, secure, a person of authority and power, trailing in your wake the scraping retinue, be vigilant when you walk down the street. Take notice when a stranger hurries up, breathless from the milling crowd, pressing an urgent letter in your hand and saying, "Read this, Caesar, before you go. There's something you must see." Make sure you pause. Make sure you think again before you speak. Turn down whoever bows and supplicates. The senators can wait. Don't put it off. Discover straight away the warning in that letter meant for you.
The Great Divide by Ian Parks. She looked at me and saw the bitter streets where I was born, the valley floor that offered no escape, the Chartist cobbles hard rain glistened on, and everywhere a sense of failing light streaking the uplands, making a theatre of them as it did. The unrelenting grimness of the north, its chapels, pit heads, slag heaps, union halls, processions through the darkness, millstone grit, one great red furnace blazing from the Humber to the Sheaf, fought over, misbegotten, stratified. She looked straight through me to my father's eyes, black-rimmed and smiling after a long shift. And as she gazed across the Great Divide, I let the balance of the landscape strain and give, as if the world itself were undermined, and felt not pity at the thought of it, but anger first, then pride.
The poem I have chosen is Andeby Creek. I've chosen this because Ian once read it especially for me. Andeby Creek. I went east by southeast to the place, found everything that was there, just as they said. the one road leading out and leading in, an empty beach house, brittle dunes, a few groins sloping down into the sea. No one I met there knew my name. The creek was an invention. All I saw were dikes and streams, a pumping station churning night and day. I couldn't buy a razor or a pen. The coffee pot poured sand grains from its spout. The only pub was closed. At night I lit a candle and looked out. A blank sky pressed against the empty frame, where nothing was reflected but my face. I couldn't get a signal on my phone. Next morning I resolved to try again. The road was blocked with drifts of blown back sand. I walked down to the shoreline in the mist and tried to find the reason why I came. Something had edged me closer to the brink, dissolving my identity in sea and sand and air. As for the place, it really does exist, between the flatlands and the tide. Look on the map. You'll find it there.
Towton, you at the roadside, the wind in your hair, and nearer than you know the shallow graves of those who died by the thousand here, in a cause you wouldn't think worthwhile. I could have told you how the stream ran blood for miles, and how the killing didn't stop until it grew too dark to tell the living from the dead. Perhaps I did, although the memory is lost. I can't believe a battle fought in snow one bleak Palm Sunday 5 centuries ago should make you stop your car beside the gritty monument, unless by being there you reenact my argument that the past is a process through which we must suffer, but you at the roadside with the wind in your hair, you've lived long enough to know it has no solutions to offer. I used to think it did, and that is where we differ.
Candles. Before us, all our future days stand like burning candles in a row, bright, upright candles glowing in the dark. Behind us, all our past days stand a line of burnt-out candles. Smoke rises from the nearest few, misshapen, twisted, guttering. I close my eyes. I don't want to see how soon they'll lose their light. Instead, I look in front of me. I'm terrified of looking back. If I look back, I know I'll see how far that line extends, how fast that line of cold, dead candles grows. See they?
Since 9. It's midnight, and 3 hours have passed since I first lit the lamp. How soon they disappeared. Alone with my thoughts, alone in this house. I neither read nor speak. Who is there to speak to anyway? At 9 I lit the lamp, and in that time the shade of how I was returned to me. The body that I used to have, that gave me so much pleasure in those locked and scented rooms. I was haunted by the thought of the places as they used to be, the nightclubs and the thoroughfares that are no longer there, the theatres and the cafes now shut down. The shade of who I was brought back to me, the source of my grief and family sorrow, the pain of separation and the dead, so easily forgotten and so unrecognised. Midnight, and now the hours and years have fled.
Hello Ian, it's Gaia here. I'm a bit camera shy, so you're not going to see me. You're just going to see my window seat and the view onto the communal garden. So don't be surprised if you suddenly see a fluster of wings in front of the screen, because this is where they're dying. I'm going to read Window Seat from Shell Island, because you write a lot about windows, which I love, and I've been spending a lot of time here at this window, looking out, watching the bats and the birds, and when I'm very lucky, foxes. I'm going to read Window Seat now. There's complicity in this. The way the landscape curves itself around the huge bay window where you come to sit each morning before dawn. What wakes you isn't birdsong or the need to be alone, not frost releasing its impoverished hold out in the orchard where the dead tree bends, but silence with its shades and undertones that mesh their textures through the vacant glass, making new patterns in the empty frame, a secret in the waiting, and the waiting never ends.
Oracle by Ian Parks. I had a question for her. So I went through convoluted alleys to the place. No sacred grove of olives, but a mill, abandoned when the textiles died. Reached by a narrow staircase with a missing step, the top floor open to the sky, exposed. Each city has an underside, a burnt-out region to avoid, where streets are unlit and no one goes. And there I found her, cold and drugged and shivering, on the mattress where she dozed, not as old as you'd expect for someone so acquainted with the world. When she reached her hand out, and the moonlight fell on it, there were no wrinkles puckering her skin. I gave her nothing but a crumpled note. She cast her beads on the floor. Her answer came in riddles, as if what I'd asked her were no easy thing, but a question with no answer and no language left for it. Escape was easier than I thought. I needed no direction and no guide. Instinct led me to the upper air. I climbed onto the rooftops and looked out, the spires and domes and minarets reclaiming their identity from night, the dawn, a yellow slit.
Chantry Bridge. We sit together in the window seats to watch the swollen river slide over the sharp edge of the weir. A week of rain has drained the upland farms, depositing its random debris here. A huge black tyre, a barbed wire fence, the branches of a splintered tree banked up against the man-made island where grey grass blows back and willows bend. A tuft of land, the waters inundate. The traffic slows and stops to hide the ornamental chantry on the bridge, where Clifford struck young Rutland down, despite his pleas for mercy or his age. His hot blood swirls and eddies at our feet. When I reach out to take you in my arms, there is no present, past or future tense, only the moment and the river, poised forever on the endless brink, before it dips and takes itself away, to flow and flow and end in turbulence.
The Thread by Ian Parks. As I sit beside the fire and watch you knit, the click of needles of the embers burn, the silent counting beneath the breath, and I find myself absorbed in it. More than anything that might be done or said between the acts of going and return, this old building that I've come to love, the ravelling of the purple, black and red. As you pause and slip and pearl inside the loop, so weave a hair from your inclined head into the fabric where you sit, to bind me close to you when I go. Through the long months of rain and ice and floods and falling snow, the narrative of us and what we did, all your lost generations in the thread.
The Figurehead. I wish he'd take it down, the barmaid said, then take it out and burn it. Every night it hangs suspended like a ghost in the rafters just above my bed, and if I wake up in the dark, her face is peering through the beams. Each morning she's the first thing I see. I thought of her at closing time, wiping beer stains from the tabletop, calling last orders, locking up, then climbing where the stairs twist suddenly into a cramped and many-angled room. I tried to sound uninterested, but failed. I'd let you have a look at it, except I can't have strange men up there after dark. I didn't need to see it. Her description was enough. A mermaid, arching forward, breasts exposed, her eyes fixed white and open on the world, green plaster flaking from her scales. I'm not from here, the barmaid said. I'd really like to leave, become a nurse. And with those words the Figurehead slipped out of her thoughts into mine. The place had paralysed her with the curse of being wet and windy, far from home. You know the feeling. When you've had a few, then walk out quickly in the dizzy air. Down at the cove, the tide was coming in. The barmaid and the mermaid took to sea, and in dark currents swam as one. The pub's been taken over now. Some chain has torn down all the beams, and if the Figurehead's not there, I wonder where it went. Unless it finds an exit in my dreams, where she looms huge and silent in the space above my bed, dripping salt water from her hair into my sleeping eyes, my open mouth. I'm tempted, but I don't go back. Our lives are in our dreams to some extent.
A boat in the woods. The boat is just a skeleton left stranded in the woods, high on the hill above the town and far from any river. The frame has gone, the prow has gone, and still it holds itself together where nettles spread and frail, light-headed bluebells quiver. Planks separate and fall apart. The paint begins to peel and fade. The thing it was must be rebuilt again, from hints and clues inside the mind. And soon you'd have to know that it had been there at all. A patch of slightly different coloured grass. A place that only we can find, up on the ridge we call the past, where our grandparents played.
Harmonica by Ian Parks. Listen, the sounds that you can hear arriving, faint and distant, over the rooftops and the washing lines, through open windows, under doors, over the student in a hammock who tilts her head and sways in the almost imperceptible breeze, over the attics and the red brick walls, the terraces inclining into shade, the pub yards baked and emptying, 4,000 miles from Memphis, where the creeping Mississippi deposits its own delta as it slides down to the sea, in the hour between sunset and the dark, when boys die from the concrete rim despite the warning sign, as households stoop to listen to the news, when cats are staring under cars, and parks are locked and chained, and pensioners lean on their spades in well-kept gardens dried out in the heat, and the murmur of it travels to your ear across the hinterland that lies between the patchy fields and new estates, with rail lines cracking unrepaired, and babies wake up for another feed, and watered plants exhale, in the never-to-be-repeated oneness of an unremembered afternoon, unfolding, intersecting, holding back its final shush of stillness before rain, while England pauses, counts her dead, is Ian as he cups his hand and plays.
Goldenrod. If I don't say it, someone will. The wind blows through the goldenrod as death flows through a crowd. I watch it from a distance. The whole field lifts and stirs. Close up, it holds the promise of a less than perfect world. I knew the thing before I knew its name. Now, all I know is what the name implies. A life of pure sensation. Or the rod some angel brings, announcing a momentous death or birth, each face expectant, brightly lit. I say the name and what it means, until the meaning blurs. The wind blows through the goldenrod as death flows through a crowd. Nothing is accomplished, and the world is changed by it.
Remember it like this. For once we're drifting down the stream, incredulous and free, your bare arms caught in sunlight, and your hair made incandescent by the breeze. No one we know would think of coming here to watch the ripples parting in our wake, and so we let the perfect words escape. You know as well as I do, nothing holds. The summer glitters briefly and then moves on. The children waving up from the bank turn into adults when the waving's done. That's why we shouldn't interrupt the dream or misinterpret it. I'm waiting on the landing stage, your ticket in my hand, the destination left to chance, our route unknown, unplanned. It starts somewhere in the city of love and the river running through it.
The last love poem. I was thinking how the daylight disappears, how one thing blends into another thing, as over river, rooftop, silent park, time slips without our noticing. The wave collapses and the cold wind veers through all the public places where we lived. That's what it feels like, these years on. You were quite unexpected. I've used up all the images I know. Midnight stations, coastal roads, red wine, high windows, lace, and sudden snow. Don't be surprised if language fails me now. I turn to face the sunlight. Let it go.